Traits are the general term of personality psychology referring to the many qualities one person distinguishes themselves from others. Dennis is consistently meticulous from his workplace to his personal environment. In terms of his workplace, he was arrogant, rude, confrontational, and a control freak. If you were not abiding to the city's regulations, he immediately wrote you up a ticket. On a personal level, being president of the church and a Boy Scout leader, others saw him as efficient, friendly, and a nice guy. On McRae's and Costa's The Big Five, based on many evidence read, Dennis Rader was somewhere in between being assertive and social and being withdrawn and solitary at the same time. We can relate this back to extroversion. Conscientiousness, he seemed to be logical, good organization, and planning skills, and able to process complex information. Neuroticism, he seemed somewhere in between being calm and resilient and being anxious and reactive. In agreeableness, he gave the impression of being selfish, uncooperative, and difficult at the expense of the well-being of others. In openness, he seems very intellectual, curious, imaginative, but not very practical.
Characteristic adaptations are what people want, how they seek what they desire and avoid what they fear. The question to ask when dealing with characteristic adaptations is, how do people develop plans, goals, and programs for their lives while coping with the challenges of social life? In the case of Dennis Rader, the BTK serial killer, he admitted in the courtroom to killing people to relieve himself sexually. His sexual fantasies, as he said, started for him since grade school, but he would hide them. Freud would say at this point, his superego still reigned over his id, but as they say, this man was an unassuming one. His motives are clearly what is said to be the heart of the psychoanalytical view of personality, sexuality, and aggression. For Freud, sexuality and aggression are the ultimate energy sources that influence our character. They provide motive force, the drive, and thrust for our behavior. They are our life, eros, and death, thanatos, instincts, which are usually expressed in indirect ways. Dennis Rader was indeed seeking to fulfill his sexual desires by making others suffer as he murdered them. That was his ultimate pleasure. Not only did he kill, but as he admitted, he never lost sleep over it. He would come home and go about life like anyone else. He coped with the challenges of social life by being two people, the BTK serial killer and Dennis Rader, his mask of sanity. Dennis Rader never showed signs of insanity to his peers. He deceived his neighbors, family, and friends throughout the 3 decades of his killing rampage. Maslow would probably agree that he was able to function as he reached the peak of the self-actualized person. His goals were to be recognized, to commit the perfect crime, and not get caught. He had the fulfillment of unique potentials as he felt he committed perfect crimes and got away with them every time. He said himself that to this there was no help, no cure, except death or being caught and put away. He felt so inspired by his own actions to write songs, poems, letters, and even later recount these crimes in a calm voice.
Life story. Everyone has one. It is internalized and evolving of the self that integrates the reconstructive past, perceived present, and anticipated future. Dennis Rader, the self-proclaimed BTK serial killer, grew up in the quiet suburbs of Wichita, Kansas. According to childhood friends and neighbors, he was considered a loner and invisible to many. Behind closed doors, though, Dennis was often found torturing animals. In his own confessions, he stated that he knew as early as elementary school that he had a problem with sadistic sexual fantasies, which, according to Jungian Dennis, is displaying characteristics of shadow archetype. Dennis Rader was no doubt an intelligent individual who desired perfection as well as acknowledgement. Receiving his bachelor's degree in administration of justice only intensified the perfectionist in him. Classes such as sex crimes, serial killers, and criminal investigation helped him in perpetrating crimes and derailing law enforcement. In 1974, Dennis killed his first victims. He stated that even though he had a long thought about killing in his dreams, this was the first time he had carried out killings in real life. In his confession, he repeatedly stated that he killed to release himself sexually, and this was proven in one of his signature moves. Although he had never had sex with his victims, he would kill the victims, masturbate into their panties, and leave them next to their bodies before leaving. The ultimate stimulation and climax for him was after the fact, when they were dead, because that's when he would fantasize about them and masturbate. BTK claims that he doesn't understand what it is that caused him to kill. For years, he called it Factor X, his little friend, demons, and monster. During his trial, he told the court that he couldn't stop killing because the monster inside his brain strikes whenever it wants. Monster is probably part of his rationalization, so he can blame something for what he's doing. BTK was the very definition of Jung's archetype, persona. BTK presented the world with a socially acceptable mask. His nice side was not the persona of the true archetype residing in him, but rather a highly conscious creation that led his go-go undetected for so many years. He would often have vivid dreams about finding his victims, torturing them, and killing them. And being the perfectionist he would practice binding techniques on dolls and illustrated detailed drawings of the killings. He was sexually stimulated when in control, and watching victims being tortured, as he would often strangle, release, then strangle his victims again to prolong death and get off sexually. The two things that drove him were his sadistical sexual fantasies and extreme savvy narcissism. After all, he was the one that deemed himself the BTK serial killer. Although he perfected his killing skills to avoid getting caught, he still demanded credit for the killings. When police arrested someone else for his quadruple murders of 1974, he wrote the local newspapers taking credit for the killings, saying, "I did it by myself, with no one else help." And to prove it, he described every detail. Victim after victim, 10 in all, Dennis bragged to officials and the media, taunting them and displaying his egotism. But in 2005, his ride was over and was apprehended by officials. At the end, Dennis was his own enemy, for had it not been for his taunting officials and sending them evidence, the BTK killer might still be among us today.
All around me are familiar faces, worn out places, worn out faces, bright and early for their daily races, going nowhere, going nowhere. Their tears are filling up their glasses, no expression, no expression. Hide my head, I wanna drown my sorrow. No tomorrow, no tomorrow. I find it hard to tell you, I find it hard to take. When people run in circles, it's a very, very mad